Ladies and gentlemen, when we say, as a collective country of nearing 1.5 billion people, approaching a $5 trillion economy and soon to be the third largest country by GDP in the world, what does that really translate into? Who are we? What are we here for? What is our place in the global community? And what is the good that we can bring in? So when we espouse the slogans of Vishwa Mitra and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, what is the translation of that into practice? For many, many decades, the system of global governance, as imperfect as it has been pivoted on organizational structural frameworks that many would argue have not only become outdated but are now downright unfair. They don't represent the modern world, its challenges and the future. A good example is that for the better part of more than a decade, India has been piloting a petition on terrorism in the United Nations, which has yet to find concurrent agreement on a simple definition of what terrorism is. In that context, do certain structures need to be displaced, and I'm particularly not using the word replaced, but displaced by new creations? In this subcontinental region, for several decades, we chased after something called the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, SAARC. It was a dead entity because a Western neighbor of India didn't allow it to function to any good accord. Since then, we have seen so many developments. The Quad has become a reality. I2U2 has started. And as we speak today, India is hosting one of the largest gatherings of representatives from sovereign countries from across the globe outside of the UN General Assembly in New York. 125 countries are represented in what is being called the Voice of the Global South Summit in its second edition. The goals are to create a platform to discuss supply chains, to discuss alternative energy, to discuss the environment. But preeminently, we need to look at this summit after what's happened with India's presidency of the G20 and put the puzzle pieces together. Can India be the voice of the global South, that it can sit on the table of the world's largest economies, but at the same time represent the voices, the aspirations, the needs, and indeed the future of all the other countries who are not part of the G20? And secondly, within the richest countries in the world, can India be accepted as that voice of representation? Let's open up that conversation. Ambassador Daniel Carman is with us. He's been the former Israeli ambassador to India, Bhutan and Sri Lanka. Dr. Satoru Nagao, he is visiting fellow at the Hartston Institute in Tokyo. Professor Madhav Nalapat, the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, and Professor D.K. Giri is joining us as well. Professor Nalapat, let me begin with you. Now, what do you make of this summit, sir? It's at a nascent stage, but the fact that representatives from 125 countries have shown up, what is that indicating? Is that indicating tokenism, or is that indicating some sort of momentum building towards what goal?
Rishabh, I would like to make it very clear that India is very much a part of the global South. And Prime Minister Modi has emphasized that many, many times. You'll recall in the G20, he was very clear that the African Union needed to be brought in on the same lines as the European Union. India welcomed the European Union as part of the G20, and India said that the African Union deserves no less. And of course, very fortunately, all the G20 countries agreed, and that was done. The point is, Rishabh, the point that's been made by the Prime Minister is that the global South can be leaders in the world, leaders in technology. You have seen, for example, the Chandrayaan mission. exploring a side of the moon that was never touched before in the several decades of lunar investigation. You're seeing what's happening in vaccine research. You're seeing what's happening in digitalization, in which digital payment methods and interfaces in India are now spanning hundreds of millions of people, all in the space of 2 or 3 years. Other countries have taken decades, we have taken years. The point is, Rishabh, it is no longer possible to bracket the global south as the quote unquote perennially underdeveloped part of the world. The developing countries, a euphemism for underdeveloped countries, and the developed countries. The reality is there are parts of India, and pardon me for saying so, but if you come to our little campus in Manipal, you will realize what I mean, that are as high tech as any of the high tech centers anywhere in the world. And India is a leader in several leading technologies. So the point that the Prime Minister is making, we, the collective South, the collective global South, we have no reason to feel any kind of complex. We can do it. We can be right there at the forefront of innovation, of and of development. And if we are together, and if we function together in a smooth manner, well, we can do that much faster. And I want to point out here, Rishabh, something I've been saying for quite some time. It is absolutely wrong to consider China part of the global south, whether geographically or in terms of GDP. It's certainly not part of the global south. India is definitely part of the global south, both geographically and in terms of and in other terms. So I'd like to
Okay.
say the global south has come of age, and this meeting shows that the 125 countries in the global south realize that and are now desiring to work together.
Okay. Come of age. Is that reflective then of a global community coming of age, and what role India will represent over there? Let me quickly get Ambassador Carmon here. So, Ambassador Carmon, in fact, as we speak, you are in the midst of a crisis. You just told us you are in a de facto safe house, a bunker, probably in your own home or office,
Right.
because a battle is going on, a hot war is going on, there's a conflict going on. You've spent time here in India, so many years. When you look towards India, what do you see now?
When I look towards India, I see a country, and I must connect and agree perfectly with my predecessor. I see a country in motion. I see a country that is changing its face gradually, relatively quickly. I see a country, I heard very well the inaugural speech of Prime Minister Modi on Independence Day 2014, when he set goals for the country. He said, I'm a newcomer to Delhi. Forgive me for saying things as a newcomer, but I have a few goals to reach. Some will reach in 20 years, some will reach in 30 years, but we have to start somewhere. And this somewhere is now. This somewhere was in 2018. This summer was when India confronted COVID. It's there when in any city in India you can see a cyber city where thousands of youngsters go in and out and do innovation. I see a country that is becoming more and more industrialized. And the vision of India is something really to be admired. And this is what I see when I think about India. I have a few things that I could say about multilateralism and the weaknesses of having to be part of a larger group like the United Nations, like this initiative or the other
okay.
initiative.
But Ambassador Carmel, let me ask you then a specific question. I'll come back to
Yes,
you on
sir.
that larger. But in a specific sense, are
Yes.
you seeing the responsibility, the maturity, the being in tune with what is happening and affecting other partner countries, including what is happening in your part of the world, in Israel? Are you seeing credibility and credulity in this affectious leadership?
I see leaders around the world who understand very well what has happened to us, who have seen how terrorism has emerged, with its ugliest face through Hamas, with their agenda, with their vision, with their religious fanaticism. When Hamas has attacked, and I'm sure you've seen more videos than I've seen, because we don't show them here in Israel, about what was done, how 1,400 of our people and foreigners, not only Israelis, foreigners from 30 countries, were massacred, butchered, decapitated, raped, burned alive, etc. And what we have nowadays, it's not an act of terrorism, it's war. And when there is war, at war, you act like in a war. And I'm very glad to see that many leaders around the world, many leaders, and that's not the usual UN resolution calling for restraint. There is a war, and people around the world understand it's a local war. It is a war with the rules of the war, but it has a more large significance of maybe I would even say a conflict of civilizations between the extremists and the moderates. And
yes,
can you not understand? And I'm sure you do. 9 days before 26/11, what terrorism is.
You know, having experienced it ourselves, and I completely agree with you. So new things have happened. I mentioned I2U2 here. I mentioned the Quad already. I'm going to ask Dr. Nagao about that. But yes, that credibility and credulity is going to require, for example, India taking a firm position on classifying Hamas as a terrorist organization. If we are expecting the world to recognize our definition of terror, then we have to recognize other people's definition of terrorism as well. So leadership on that front will be required. It is emerging and it is something different. Dr. Nagao, now we've had so many hours of conversations regarding the Quad, the challenges in the Indo-Pacific, the shift of global focus there. You've seen developments, as I mentioned, of I2U2. I'm sure you've seen things like BIMSTEC and Prime Minister Modi at ASEAN just ahead of the G20 presidency in India. What is the evolution of a global structure that you're seeing, and what is India's role in it?
Thank you very much. In this, I am focusing on the relation of the counter-China strategy and the situation in the Middle East. Indeed, view from the United States, U.S. want to withdraw the resources they invested in the Europe and Middle East. And instead of this, they want to focusing on counter-China strategy in the Indo-Pacific. Through this process, there are many projects U.S. committed. I2U2 is one of the things. And mainly their focusing is re-establishing not re-establishing, but establishing the relation between Israel and Hamas. Israel and Saudi Arabia, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Because if the U.S. succeed to persuade Israel and Saudi Arabia to establish formal diplomatic relations, the U.S. interest, the protecting Israel or containing Iran, will be fulfilled without heavily involvement of the United States. So instead of the U.S. invest hugely in the Middle East, they can maintain the order in the Middle East, and then the United States relocate their resources to the Indo-Pacific to counter China. But that's why the United States try to include India as a part of this strategy, which is I2U2 or IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. But view from China, view from Iran, view from Hamas, this project is terrible because view from China, this is counter-China strategy. View from Iran, this is containing Iran. View from Hamas, maybe people will forget about the Palestinian issue. So that's why they try to attack and create a problem between the Jews versus Islam. So now, what kind of problem we are facing is the U.S. need to divert their resources in the Europe supporting Ukraine, in the Middle East supporting Israel, under such kind of situation, the presidential election of Taiwan will come the next January.
Okay.
So under such kind of situations, India's role is most important because ally of the U.S. and ally of the U.S. or a partner of the U.S. need to share the security burden with the United States.
Okay.
In this case, which country can do that? India. That's why the
that's the genesis of the Quad. That is a role that others might see us performing. But let me get Professor Giri into this. Professor Giri, what is the role that we see ourselves performing? Who are we? Are we looking at the global South in terms of influence, in terms of as the Chinese do, or the Americans before them, that this is a place where you can get resources from, this is the place where you can send off your foreign exchange reserves and indebt these countries? Or is it different? Is it a place where you can come help with COVID vaccines? Is it different? Is the approach different?
Absolutely. Rishabh, I'm glad you asked me that question because I was preparing my little intervention on that. And I'm also glad that you mentioned BIMSTEC because I'm sitting in the BIMSTEC headquarters here in Bangkok. So that was very encouraging. Now, my answer is the rules of the game in international politics have to be changed. It is not just GDP-based development. It has to be many other things which India is proposing. Like Vishwaguru or promoting good neighborliness, multiculturalism, culture of synthesis, humanism. And that has been our civilizational strength. And that should come to the fore as a leader of Global South. If we compete with GDP and compete with, resource, mopping of resources, as you said, which West and has done and China is doing in a very predatory way, that is not the way to go, really. And it is India's strength lies in our civilization. We are happy with we can live with our poverty as well, or less resources. We believe in gross domestic happiness. I am a Sumakarian who was a Gandhian, who was a Buddhist. And he was talking about gross domestic happiness, not just gross domestic product by exploiting either colonies or in a neo-colonial way, getting people into debt trap like China is doing. So I don't think Chinese model or the former Western development model is really advisable. So India should come up, which occasionally our Indian leadership does. And Professor Nalapat mentioned a few things, but I'll talk about our civilizational strength, our cultural strength. That should really lead India because there is no limit to making money. Like Gandhi said, that enough for everybody's need, but there is not much for everyone's greed. So this India's philosophy, India's history of unity and synthesis, that should come to the fore.
Exactly, because my thoughts is, then we see, because the real world is complex, as we are seeing happening right now. So do we see it in a utilitarian way? Do we see it in a zero-sum game kind of way? Or do we see it something differently and the approach therefore becomes different? Professor Nalapat, why should the global South, when it views India, it has development models, Korea is a development model, Vietnam is another development model, there are other development models that are available. Why would the rise of India, people looking at India and see this is something remarkable happening, this country is doing something very interesting, and how they are approaching us is different, refreshing?
Rishabh, let me go back to Gandhiji when you talked about zero-sum games. And that he said that an eye for an eye will finally make the whole world blind. And another thing he said was, let all the windows on all sides of my house be open and let the breezes blow in and let me experience those breezes so we can get the best of everything. And that synthesis has been at the heart of India. The point of the matter is that there have been, we had a very unfortunate situation in 1947 when on the totally absurd, ground of religion, we were partitioned. But the reality of the situation is that synthesis is so important in Indian culture. And when we talk of Indian culture, we're talking of 5,000-6,000 years of recorded culture. There are individuals who feel only 300 years is important, the Western period. There are people who feel about 500, 600 years is important. That is the Mughal period. And there are others who feel only about 4,000, 4,300, 4,500 years important, which is the Vedic period. The fact is, all three periods are, in a sense, synthesized in India. And that's why where you have, even for example, Sarsang Chalak of the RSS, Dr. Mohan Bhagwat, he said the DNA of every individual in India is a fusion of the Vedic, the Mughal, and the Western. It's a fusion. And that fusion is what makes us strong. That synthesis is what makes us strong. And that is where countries with different experiences have different things to learn from India. Because in different parts of India, different experiments are being tried out, different models are being tried out. Some are successful, some are not. But that is the importance of India, that we represent a platform where across the world, people can see how we are doing and all the different shades of opinion, all the different types of experiencing that they can go through. That is what is unique in India. I want to end this by saying, Rishabh, leadership is important. The first Prime Minister of India who came from what is called a societally backward background is Narendra Modi, the first Prime Minister who came from that kind of a background. And he came from an extremely poor family. We have had prime ministers who have come from very privileged families, but he has come from an extremely underprivileged family. We talk of a platinum spoon and a silver spoon. I don't even believe the family had a spoon, possibly. So the fact is that kind of ensured a kind of leadership that basically placed emphasis on the welfare of all. You were saying about Vasudhaiva Kutumbaka, and expand the welfare of all, to expand the welfare of the global south, and through the global south, everybody in the world. Ultimately, it has got to be a win-win game. Both sides have got to win. Otherwise, as Dr. Giri says, if you're a predatory power, not only the world, but finally you will lose. And that is what we're seeing in China now, in the Chinese economy.
If we are to draw the assumption, Ambassador Carmon, that the events that are underfoot across the world, including the ones that you are facing, which is a life and death situation, as we speak, play sometimes into larger geostrategy. There might be forces out there who do not want a happy association between Israel and the Saudis. They don't want the Abraham Accords. They want the world to burn because they thrive out of chaos. What is the role that India plays, in your view, should play in your view?
Well, the first thing that you said in the program was the definition of terrorism, which India leads. I was at the United Nations for many years, and I saw the effort of India to lead, to finally get a definition of terrorism. I mean, everyone knows what terrorism is. Everyone knows what terrorism, and some of us even feel it on their own blood and flesh. But unfortunately, in an organization as complicated, as political as in the United Nations, this is not impossible. You know, it's not even impossible at the United Nations to congratulate Egypt and Israel for making peace. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? And this is why I caution to be very, very cautious when building those multilateral organizations, and be subject to what I would say the low common denominator.
Yeah.
India for sure has a big role as a leader, no doubts about it, but we have always to be sure and to play. And this is what is so great about the Indian government as I know it in the last almost 10 years. India knew how to make the synthesis between multilateral and bilateral. India looked 360 degrees around itself and found the right partner for any kind of challenge. And India could do the very delicate balance of non-zero-sum game, saying, in our region, we can have good relations with our strategic partners, Israel, and we can be committed to the Palestinian cause. That's fine. But Hamas and terrorism is something completely else.
Yes.
We all have to fight terrorism anywhere and Hamas in our region. And
Yeah,
this is what
I think that point is well made and now beyond well established. Let me get Professor Giri back into this. Professor Giri, but it's a difficult one. The world is an ugly place. You might go to Afghanistan and do a lot of good deeds and build the parliament and build the roads, but then ugliness takes place. And you can argue in Sri Lanka, you could be trying to bail out the country during a time of economic crisis and help out, but there are no guarantees. You know what's happening in Maldives as we speak. So in a world where there are no guarantees, good deeds don't often result in the karma that you wish for. How do we then approach it in a real sense?
Rishabh, we have produced Chanakya in our country, so we know how Chanakya diplomacy is. So we are good at that diplomacy as well. But goodness page, Rishabh, look at the respect that we enjoy in Afghan people, including Taliban, and look at what is happening between Afghanistan and Pakistan. If your intentions are honest and goodwill is there, then you would be recognized. And by Pakistan, because of its devious nature, now the fight between Taliban and Pakistanis. Look at when the Afghanistan cricket won the elections. You see who are dancing with them. I mean, when the cricket match. I'm sorry. So like that. It is there. We are doing both. I mean, we are not greenhorns in diplomacy as well, and we are doing it very well. Like the Israeli ambassador said, that's the fantastic stand we have taken on Israeli conflict, really, calling out Hamas and then also standing with humanism. Wherever people are dying, India stands for it. Every death will hurt us, you see. So that is our approach. So we are doing both, Rishabh. Your concern is absolutely genuine, but we are good diplomats.
So you are a believer in good karma. Do a good deed and good will come to you. Okay, let me leave the last word with let me leave the last word with Dr. Nagao. Dr. Nagao, so do things like sending vaccines out of the country when even within India we had not completed our vaccination drive, sending relief to Sri Lanka, providing earthquake assistance to Turkey, which we know Turkey is not necessarily under the present regime a great friend of India. Do these things actually add up? Do they matter? Do they in the ugly world of realpolitik, what value does this have?
Yeah, India has contributed a lot in the global south, and India try to do such kind of will is very important. And in this case, as a counter-China strategy, persuading global south is a very important, vital part, and which India should take responsibility. Because World War I, 32 countries was the winner and 4 countries was the loser. So this bigger group wins competition. World War II 54 versus 8, and the Cold War 54 versus 26. Every time bigger group win the competition. So that's why now the compete with China, the India gets the global south group, and we must win the competition with China. That is India's most important role. View from Japanese, that is India's advantage, I think.
Okay, so here's the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen. This summit is already a success. Just the fact that for the second time that's been organized, so it's a very young, nascent organization, and 125 countries have shown up. So that's a success. Now, this is the measuring force. Do we as a country in India offer something different to the global south that they haven't seen before from all those proffering leadership in the past, whether it be the British, the colonial powers, the Chinese, the Americans, who have all come under disguises but come for self-interest? Are we more in tune to understand the problems that actually affect development and the aspirations of the global south? Are we acceptable in terms of leadership, and are we then that bridge between the G20 and these countries? It is a discovery that is taking place as this engagement takes place, but something phenomenal is happening, which should hopefully set the path, fingers crossed, to a future a lot better than the one we've seen in the last century, even though it is plagued by conflict which is raging around us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.